It doesn't make any sense to me to get the budget under control by devoiding yourself of a national defense. There's only one place to be when you're fighting a war. Second place is no good. You have to win.
I hear people talk about, well, you know, the United States military spends more money than the next 17 nations combined. Well, the next 17 nations combined are not committed to maintaining peace and stability around the world. We are.
My first day there, I got one of the most valuable lessons I could have asked for. Just as I was sitting down for my first meeting in Iraq, we got hit with a 1,000-pound truck bomb.
After World War II, our leaders in Washington neglected their constitutional responsibility to provide for the common defense. And then we were unready for the Korean War. After Vietnam, they let it happen again. America's military became hollow, lacking the resources it needed to fulfill its missions and provide trained and ready forces and prepare for the future. And now there are ominous signs that it's happening all over again.
The big picture is the military really is a national insurance policy. Its primary purpose is to deter war. And if you have to go to war, it has to win it as fast and as inexpensively as it can. My name is Kerry Kachijan. I have been in the military for 30 years. I was commissioned in 1982 and spent 6 years on active duty. I spent the last 24 in reserve service. I've been recalled to active duty twice, mostly in support of the reconstruction of Iraq and Afghanistan.
My name is Tom Shanahan. I was in the Navy for 30 years, captain when I retired. After Vietnam, I went to be commanding officer of USS Canisteo, which is a fleet supply ship stationed in Norfolk, Virginia.
My name is Dave Deptula, retired as a Lieutenant General in the United States Air Force after 35 years of service. When I first got assigned to Kadena Air Base, Japan in 1979, I was flying brand new F-15 Cs and Ds. At that time, those aircraft had 15, 20 hours of total lifetime on them. The F-15 was designed in the late 60s, early 70s, first flight 1972, but the airplane was originally designed for a 4,000 hour service life. It was later extended to 8,000 hours. And no one at the time ever conceived that it would be flying longer than that. Well, here we are in 2008. My son's at Kadena flying that exact same airplane.
If the government decides it doesn't have enough money to operate, it needs to cut things. Why the military is the easiest thing to cut, especially after you come out of a war. And Vietnam was the same thing. When I was in the Navy Yard, those in charge of personnel matters decided that we really didn't need all our manning because we were in port for overhaul. So they, little by little, stripped us of a lot of the people we had. And when I submitted my readiness report, I said my personal status was such that I wasn't capable of getting underway. We were in one of those periods where, in order to cut costs, we cut personnel, and we cut personnel too far.
Trying to rebuild a country during a war is something we've never practiced in peacetime. It has unique challenges. We were principally trying to avoid combat. 90% of our force were civilians. But to get these people to these project sites, we had to conduct ground movements. And when we conducted ground movements, we were subject to probably the most intense attacks. Because this unit was organized, staffed, equipped, and deployed so quickly, there was no spare military equipment for it. We, in the reconstruction side, were precluded from buying anything. We could only lease. So finding a contractor that would lease us a combat vehicle. In combat, we were striking out everywhere. So we had to go out and acquire sport utility vehicles for transportation.
The average age of the F-15 CD force is 28 and a half years. The average flight time on those platforms is around 7,500 hours. So we have really flown these aircraft well beyond what originally would be believed as their replacement lifetime. And now, because of some of the fiscal constraints that are being imposed on the Department of Defense, there's consideration being given to extending the lifetime even further.
You draw down equipment, you draw down personnel, and therefore you draw down the readiness of your ship to deploy. I had that case in Canisteo. I was drawn down to the standpoint that I could not get the ship at sea, and I had to be honest with my superiors and say I couldn't do it.
Without armor, when you're moving down an Iraqi road in a sport utility vehicle, the one thing you have is speed. So we would drive as fast as we could, sometimes 80 to 110 miles an hour. It was somewhat like a Mad Max movie, rolling down the road in a sport utility vehicle. And we modify the SUVs as we needed to, often ripping off the tailgates and putting a tail gunner in there with a Russian PKM machine gun, because they would have BMWs. And they like driving up behind us 110 miles an hour and doing a drive-by shooting. There were cases where we had people actually hanging their personal body armor outside the vehicle, duct taping it to the vehicle, trying to provide some small level of protection.
If in fact we want to maintain our position as the world's sole superpower, and to be able to succeed across the spectrum of operations, you need to have the equipment to be able to do that.
Whatever force seems to be fighting at a higher level during that period of time seems to get a lot more funding than the other forces do. If we draw down the aircraft carrier forces now and the Air Force now because we don't really need them in Afghanistan and Iraq, well then when you fight the next war, if it happens to be either Iran or over in Korea, you're going to need the forces which you just drawn down on and not so much of the forces which you've built up.
You don't want to cut so drastically that we wind up with the situation we wound up with after Vietnam, where much of the Army had money to go out and do physical fitness training, to wash their trucks and to paint rocks. We've got to have a ready and relevant military.
These stories are a warning to all of us. America's military is in danger of becoming hollow again. We have to decide if the price of unpreparedness is worth it. We have to tell Washington what we want. Get the facts, get involved, make a difference.